everyone, and welcome back to another edition of gaming news that isn't bloody depressing. Yes, it is time for the Ghost of Tsushima Post-Mortem. The game has been out for a few weeks, and it's time to look at what happened because it set a number of interesting records, and let me tell you that the future of this game, I think, is pretty darn bright, at least insofar as Sony's bottom line is going to go, because they are going to be getting that juicy double dip. Now, of course, the one thing we're pushing is subs. Over half the people who watch this channel are not subscribed, so we are trying to bump that number up and get to 250k. A bunch of you has joined us yesterday, I think 150, 200. So the more the merrier. Thanks for all your support, your subs, your likes, and actually watching the video and getting that watch time up seriously helps us in revitalizing, putting the juice back into this channel. And with that said, let's go and let's talk about Ghost of Tsushima, a bloody great game. And also the last major PS4 exclusive, and that is really something worth taking stock in. Now, despite the initial disparity in the critic versus user consensus that we covered last week, which really is a larger disparity than I really first thought, the game seems to have been an extreme hit, posting very solid sales numbers, especially, and I think very curiously, in Japan, where the game pretty much ended up completely out of stock. Now, like with The Last of Us Part 2, Ghost of Tsushima was hyped up for a long time. I mean, we saw it ages ago, but unlike The Last of Us Part 2, it had no controversy. It just went and was a good game in an uncontroversial way, and it's been happily doing its thing. So yes, sales records have been broken, and the hype actually appears to have paid off. So, just how well has Ghost of Tsushima done, and why? Well, after a often mysterious and quite long hype train, it launched on the 17th of July, and it's been a big success. It sold through more than 2.4 million units globally in its first 3 days, and this does make it a Sony bestseller, albeit with a few caveats, because officially speaking, Tsushima is... okay, it is the PS4's fastest selling first-party original IP debut. So there's definitely a few caveats there. Now, Ghost of Tsushima did lag a good bit behind The Last of Us Part 2, which was over 4 million in around the same time period, and God of War in terms of those launch numbers, but those were also parts of established franchises. The most clear comparison is actually to Horizon Zero Dawn, a game that is actually bound to come out, well, it's about to come out on PC pretty much any minute now. And that'll be interesting to see what its PC performance is like, because even its pre-sales have actually done quite well. But Tsushima has done so much better than Zero Dawn on launch, because it took Zero Dawn 2 weeks to outsell what Ghost of Tsushima did on opening weekend. And that's a game that was pushed heavily. I mean, Horizon Zero Dawn was on the buses in Belfast, like traditional advertising banners. So that was a game that was pushed massively too. And Tsushima has done so much better than it. Now, of course, there's also more mystery in its hype cycle. You could argue that it just is a theme and setting that maybe clicks with people more, but still, it's a absurd success for Sony. Then it's also going down particularly well in Japan. The authenticity of Sucker Punch's homage, of course, would have been open to additional scrutiny, right? Like that idea of sometimes whenever maybe the Americans cover Irish things, over here in Ireland we kind of roll our eyes. Really, well, you guys kind of do a lot of things. But, you know, the idea of this other studio, this Western studio coming in, covering Japan, you could see how maybe in Japan they think, will they do this right? Will they do it well? And no, it seems like they actually did an exceptional job. And as such, Ghost of Tsushima has become the third Western-developed game to get a perfect 40 out of 40 score from Famitsu, which is pretty insane. And that's after GTA 5 and The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. So apparently they're a bit more okay with bugs at Famitsu. Certainly an interesting one, but a massive achievement for Sucker Punch. Anyway, Tsushima sold 213k copies on opening weekend in Japan. It topped the all-platform charts, and it actually surpassed the previous record holder, Death Stranding, which shifted 186k copies. And then it also outsold The Last of Us Part 2 by about 35k copies there too. Then also, I think quite notably, Tsushima outsold Paper Mario The Origami King when it was going on its way to the top, and in doing that, it became only the second non-Nintendo Switch title in the Japanese Sony's top 10. And actually, and this is insane, it sold so many copies that PlayStation Japan actually had to tweet saying that so many stores were out of stock that people either had to purchase digitally or wait for a restock. That is how well it did. And I mean, somehow even like PlayStation Japan didn't understand what their like Japanese audience wanted, which kind of speaks to PlayStation's Western first approach, at least in this kind of like Jim Ryan era. But I just think it's interesting that they actually, you know, they had this Japan set game that seemed to be bloody brilliant, and the one place where they really seemed to have underestimated demand was Japan. Just kind of funny. Now, it is hard to say exactly why it did so well in Japan. It could just be that it's the setting and that it's got a strong gameplay focus. I think that's a safe bet. There's also, I think, some degree of novelty in it being a very Japanese game, but developed by a Western developer. And that's especially seeing that Sucker Punch really seem to have nailed those aspects. Then also, like, the real-life island of Tsushima holds a pretty strong appeal for tourists, and the game did a really good job of actually showing the real beauty of that area. So much so that Nagasaki Prefecture has actually developed a tourism page that links the two of them. So yes, in short, fantastic performance worldwide and fantastic performance in Japan. And while we're on the topic of sales, I mean, it really seems like that PlayStation audience is happy to pony up the cash, because Sony's big last two first-party exclusives for this generation, because of numerous delays, ended up releasing pretty much on top of each other, right? Like, essentially within a month. It's interesting, then, that both games have sold extremely well. Now, it could be that some people did, you know, use their Last of Us, or they used their money in the Last of Us Part 2, and maybe they've got to wait for Tsushima, but what is clear is that no matter what, Tsushima did really well, even though it had a massive profile game come out the month before that would have been eating up the disposable income of at least its console's audience. Now, to move on, for examining why it did so well, I'd say mainly it did a good job of playing to a certain niche, and despite being a new IP launching towards the end of a console's lifespan, it succeeded in really making people take notice, and I think that's for a few different reasons. Number one, I think Japan is just up, right? I think more people are interested in there as a setting in their games. You've got the likes of Sekiro, Nioh, and just more Japanese games actually doing well in the West. I think maybe outside of just like the traditional JRPGs, there's been like quite a few notable ones. So I think people are generally interested in that era. So I think there's that. But also, I think you then have to combine that with how Tsushima is not a Souls-like experience, akin to, say, Nioh or Sekiro. Now, yes, you can go for a perfect parry build, which I've been enjoying a lot to get some of those Sekiro vibes, but still, it is a much more accessible game for the uninitiated person, right? The person who's going to see Sekiro and just be really scared by it, which, you know what, fair enough, it's a punishing game. And really, yeah, I think that, like in Japan itself, aesthetic and setting are probably going to be playing very important roles in this game's worldwide popularity. I mean, samurai, ninja, they're up there with pirates, Vikings, cowboys, in terms of things that are just cultural icons that everybody can see. And then, of course, like, Japan's a pretty interesting place. Seeing a new take on that's really fun. Sekiro Nioh already showed us that there is a market for the kind of experience that Tsushima promised, and then Sucker Punch just went and delivered that in a way that's far more accessible. And of course, with that massive Sony budget and massive Sony marketing. And I think that actually sort of highlights some of the differences between critics and players, where, yeah, critics had a bunch of issues. Right now, yes, they did praise the setting and the combat, but the sort of lack of variety in the open world experience, the narrative, those things were criticized. And in fairness, it's an interesting thing, because I would also criticize those things. I think the story is really serviceable and, like, I'm in, but it's not super special. And the same goes for the open world. It's not particularly engaging as an open world, but it is a place that I like to go around. So it's interesting that I would agree with the critics that those things are not strong points of this game, but the bit for me is, in the context of the overall experience offered by Tsushima, it hasn't really mattered, and that's why, in the limited amount of time that I've played it, I have been enjoying it so much. And I think it's more that I think that just sort of highlights a bit of that critic-user review gulf, where there's things where a lot of users will be like, yeah, I mean, it's not great, but it's also not the point, and I don't care. where the reviewers are maybe going to see that same criticism and be a little bit more punishing on it, at least in some areas. I think this is something that might be happening. So yes, while Tsushima might not be the deepest experience in the world, it has engaged with players. It's resonated with them. I mean, Engadget Japan actually were interesting. They pointed out that it didn't have the, quote, odd or, quote, uncomfortable storylines that Japanese people are turned off by in American movies. Now, to be honest, I don't know exactly what that means because, not Japanese, not been to Japan, don't really know what they think of American media over there. But certainly if you're somebody who would maybe know a bit more of what Engadget Japan we're talking about there, I'd love to hear from you. But still, though, it is clear that I'd say, if we're going to go more simply here, that game narratives don't really have to always break new ground or radically change your worldview in order to be good. Maybe it's a case where The Last of Us Part 2, it achieved divisiveness by really trying to strive in that area, where I think if you look with Tsushima, a more suitable comparison could actually be Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. And I say that because that's a game that I suppose is a bit more Souls-like, but also is one that really didn't do anything new. It just took a whole bunch of parts together that were tried and true, and it put them together, had a serviceable story, and away you go. You just had a really good game that appealed to players. And really, I think that's why Tsushima and it have done quite well. And that does give me just a little bit of optimism for some of the future of game design. Not that I don't want those deep, challenging experiences. Like, yes, I disliked what The Last of Us Part 2 did narratively. I thought it was ham-fisted. I thought it was clumsy. I thought it was not particularly well written, even though it was masterfully acted. So I would love more experiences like that game that are really trying to push the bounds. It's what I love in other forms of media as well. But also, there are video games who are maybe going to be more focused on being a video game and being a different type of experience. And I think that if those safe bets that are just really bloody good, like with Tsushima, like with Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, if that's something that is just more in the up, I think that's just going to be good for having, one or two games a year that are just a really good sort of big budget, also very good video game, just kind of workhorse that we can all enjoy. And in terms of some other things, I also really like how Tsushima has a very minimalist HUD, and I'd love it if more games would actually take inspiration from that. So I've got to wonder, could Tsushima's emphasis on using the wind or the wild animals to indicate points of interest maybe spark a trend of immersive, sort of organic exploration? I'd love to see that. And then also, just had a good focus on combat that's really fun and responsive, which I massively appreciate, because sometimes it just feels like everything is so trying to be beautifully animated and perfect with loads of anticipation and loads of follow through and all of the, all the 12 principles being applied perfectly, that sometimes a little bit of the gameplay just, the responsiveness isn't there. And I really think that Tsushima managed to do a great job of having really responsive combat and gorgeous animations. And there's times where those things don't always line up perfectly for me in games. I mean, certainly Sekiro, wonderful game, but yeah, it can be clippy business when when obviously the animation stuff sometimes is sacrificed to have the most responsive gameplay possible. So I think Tsushima actually struck a pretty remarkable balance in that regard. Then, before we close it off, I want to talk about money, because money's really important. It's important for Sony, and they're going to make a lot of it. They've already made a lot of it, but here's the rub, right? Horizon Zero Dawn's not out on PC yet, but we even saw that its Steam pre-orders were trending super well. Now, you've got Death Stranding, you've got Horizon Zero Dawn. I have to imagine Tsushima will also end up coming out on the PC. And that means Sony are going to make a hell of a lot of money. And I just think it's interesting that Sony are going to have this power of having their massive PS4 or PS5 exclusives, and then I just have to wonder, if the Death Stranding and Horizon experiments do well, how much more money will they make? Because yes, 2.4 million sales for this game in its first 3 or 4 days, that's great. About the same number in 2 weeks for Horizon Zero Dawn, that's also incredible. But we all know how many million Steam users there are. We all know how well the PC platform has done as of late. So I have to wonder, will Sony's eyes open up a little bit when they actually see just how much they can make by, doing those ports? So overall, to close it up, despite the game's failings, or maybe I could say lack of ambition in certain areas, it does appear that its appeal actually just lies in the experience that it offers. And as far as getting that, giving people that experience that they want, it, you know, whether it's an 8 out of 10, a 9 out of 10, or a 10 out of 10, it's enough that it clicks with people, and it's been successful. I think just like how Spider-Man succeeded in just giving people an authentic superhero story and gameplay, I think Tsushima is doing the same thing for just an engrossing samurai tale that the player actually feels powerful in. It uses tight, accessible gameplay with a gorgeous setting to create really a pretty incredibly mass-marketable new IP at a very late stage of a console's life, and that is impressive. I think an emphasis on the organic exploration really steers it away from the traditional trappings of open world games and means that your traveling between places is just nice and experiential instead of an Ubisoft icon bombardment, so I think that's worked out pretty well. And it's just giving people what they want: entertaining, engaging experiences where they can just cut loose and have some fun without being assailed by Assassin's Creed levels of just stuff thrown at you or the protracted misery of The Last of Us Part 2. So really, it has just succeeded. It's really good that it's succeeded. I played like an hour and a half, 2 hours of it. It's just really hard to find spare time. I'm going to put it that way. It's just like with Horizon Zero Dawn. I played like 3 or 4 hours of that, and suffice to say, I'm waiting until PC. But certainly with Tsushima, I mean, come on, how many people are going to buy that on the PS5 for that 4K 60 and then on PC at some stage, right? Like, the potential for that insane money double dip is certainly going to be there. And I mean, like, even backing that up, Herman Hulst is the lead of Worldwide Studios now, and he was the Guerrilla lead, and it's probably no coincidence that he's now leading Worldwide Studios, and you've got Horizon and Death Stranding both hitting PC and on, of course, the Decima engine as well. So an interesting situation. I, for one, can't wait to play this game as much as I really wanted to wait for the PS5 or PC so I could get it at 60. Honestly, it's one of the more solid 30s I've got, and for the experience it's offering me, I'm okay with that, even though, obviously, my eyes are a bit more trained to 120 hertz, but hey, I'm just gonna have to suck it up and enjoy the game for what it is, because you know what? It's bloody great. And if you do have a chance to play it, yeah, it actually gets a hearty recommendation from me. So that's it for this video, a post-mortem of this game. We want to do more varied content in this channel and actually go into the analysis a bit more, even though it's not super spicy, with this, like, nobody died, nobody was exploded, Serge from Ubisoft was involved in zero way, so it's not a dramatic story, but it's a sort of thing where, actually talking about video games is kind of fun, especially when it's a good story like this one that gives us a lot to think about. So, thanks for watching, and with that, I'll see you next time.